Okay, today's topic. We're going to turn our attention to success principle number six. Success principle number six is about fear. My hope is that everyone will come off the call today with a little bit more of an understanding of the role that fear might be playing in your life. One important thing that I'd like everyone to think about is my perspective that we cannot be masterful in living our lives without interrogating our relationship with fear. That is, fear is an element that's part of everything we do. It affects how we interpret circumstances around us. It affects the decisions we make. It affects the actions that we choose to take or not choose to take, both in business and in life. And so when I say to be successful or masterful in life, we need to interrogate our relationship with fear. What I'm talking about is understanding the role that fear is playing in our lives at every moment. That is the times where we shy away from doing something that we might otherwise do, or we adjust how we might handle a situation or even how we see a situation that's happening to us. So today we're going to be looking at this topic of fear a little bit. And next time we'll talk a little bit more about some things we can do about it. So let me just ask by raising your hand to any of these things. And the purpose here is just to ask a few questions to remind ourselves where fear may be showing up in our business or our life. How many of you have ever been a little bit apprehensive of your next deal with Compass and whether you would get the splits that you would really like to have from them or not? Who's ever worried about that, thought about that? No? You're like, fine, okay, I'm going to talk with Compass. I'm going to get everything I want. I've got no worries about it. I don't believe you for a second. How many of you have ever wondered, how many of you have ever worried that a client might back out of a deal? How many of you have ever worried that an event that you're going to, that you're paying a lot of money for, you may find out at the end it wasn't worth all the money and difficulty that you took to get there, whether it's a retreat or a realm event or whatever else it might be. Yep. How many of you have ever wondered or worried that if you brought somebody onto your team that you wouldn't be able to support them financially enough to justify bringing them onto the team? Great. How many of you have ever thought about teaming up with someone else, either on a deal or on a more permanent basis, but worried a little bit about whether it would work out successfully for you? Great. So these are all examples of how fear may be playing a role in the decisions that we make about our business or our life. Did you have a hand? Oh, Martha, you're just raising your hand for that. Okay, great. So the point here is fear is something that's with us a lot, but we don't think about it in terms of fear because the word fear sounds big and scary and serious. And so I want to say a few things about how we think about this concept of fear first. Let me pull up some slides. We'll talk through this a little bit. All right. First of all, what is fear? Well, lots of definitions. Obviously, as a psychologist, think about this all the time and do a lot of discussion, and all kinds of books and things have been written about it. For our purposes, maybe we'll just go with something simple here today. Let's just call it a distressing emotional experience aroused by impending danger, pain, or loss, etc., whether the threat is real or imagined. That is, this kind of fear gene that we have is an ability to sense potential risk to ourselves. And maybe way back in the Stone Age, it was because there were lions running around and bears and things like that. And we had some sense, we could tell when something was at risk, usually our physical being. But this same physiological architecture that we have to sense fear or experience some level of fear is still with us, even though we're not living out in the jungle or the savannas or something like that. We can feel this kind of an experience when we sense something that is important to us, like our reputation or the success of our business. We still feel that feeling of fear or apprehension or nervousness or anxiousness. And so the threat becomes not a physical threat from a physical external circumstance. It can become a threat to something else that we hold dear, not physical, like let's say even our bank account. And it may be real or it may simply be imagined. That is, we can put ourselves into a fear experience simply by how we're thinking about things. And this is why I was saying a minute ago, fear can affect how we interpret things around us, or how we interpret things around us can affect an experience that we may have or may not have. of fear. So we think about the word fear, we think about what it might cause as a loss to us or some kind of a distress or difficulty for us. What kinds of things could be at risk? Well, certainly our physical self, right? When you're walking down a dark alley and you see other person following you and you start to say, uh-oh, is this person going to mug me or worse? Of course, we could sense a physical threat. But much more than that in our everyday lives are other things. If we sense that something is going to be at risk to our bank accounts, like the deal will fall apart, or I'm going to tie up with someone else and I'm going to, put my business in 50-50 with somebody else who turns out to be a loser or lazy or something like that, maybe there's a risk to me and my bank account or finances. Our reputation. If we feel that the rest of the industry finds out that we blew this deal, or a client is dissatisfied with our service and they start telling their friends what a terrible agent we are, of course, there's a risk to our reputation. And we can have some experience of anxiousness, for, let's say, over that. Membership. This is one that the psychologists talk about. As human beings, we're within a social species. And there's a desire that we have ever since the early days of our life to be accepted and be a member of a particular group, of which we kind of identify ourselves as a member. In the early days of life, that's our family. As we go through, our middle school and high school and teenage years, there's tremendous peer pressure, and kids will do all kinds of things to fit in with other groups, to fit in with the right group or to not be embarrassed and kicked out of a group. And of course, as we get older, we may have a membership as an esteemed member of the Compass real estate agent community. And we would never want to do something immoral or unethical or illegal that would cause us to be kicked out of that particular membership, let's say. And of course, there's all kinds of other groups that we are members of in one way or another. It could be a professional group like Realm, or it could be a personal group like a member of a college, alumni association, or maybe we're a member of the PTA, or we're on the board of a local charity or something like that, right? We seek to associate ourselves with others, and we worry about things that may happen that may cause us to be kicked out of or ostracized from those particular sets of relationships. Our identity or self. When our very identity or self is challenged, that can be a very distressful situation. That is, if we question ourselves and say, maybe I'm not as good an agent as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not as good an agent as I would like to think I am, or I would like other people to think I am. Or if something comes along and kind of proves to us that we're not really effective, or we're not really valuable or valid, our own validity or our own identity can be challenged. And that can be, of course, very difficult. And anything else that we value. All these things relate to this sense of distress that we can experience when we perceive a risk to our physical sense, our bank account, our reputation, membership, all those things. And so these aren't all of them, of course, but it does help us think about all the ways that fear may be playing a role to some extent in our life. If we recognize at a moment in time that there's a risk to our reputation, there's a possibility that fear will influence the decision we make at that moment or the action we take. If we feel or sense that there's some kind of risk to our membership as a particular member of a group, and we would like that to continue, we may feel that similar sense of fear, worry, or apprehension, et cetera, et cetera. So I've been talking about this word fear, but there's a lot of words that we use in our language for fear. And I want people to understand that when we use the word fear, people think, oh, well, there's not much fear in my life. What I'd like to challenge you with the thought about that is, think if you ever think in terms of any of these words. Here are some other words for fear. Do you ever say, I'm a little anxious? Do you ever say, I have anxiety issues around X? Do you ever say, I'm a little nervous about whatever? I'm nervous about this pitch. Or I'm nervous about whether this client's going to sign or not. Or I'm nervous about whether this deal is actually going to get completed or not. All those things are very low levels of this thing we call fear. I'm apprehensive, I'm cautious, I'm concerned, I'm uneasy. But not just those words, here's some more. Have you ever thought, I'm worried, I'm frightened, I'm a little insecure, I have some insecurity issues around my body type, I have some insecurity issues around being successful in my business, or I'm intimidated by somebody else in the field who seems like they've got their whole act together and I can't seem to organize my business well. So many different ways these words can come into our thinking or our experience of day-to-day life. And of course, here are many more. Typically don't use those too much except in serious situations like, I don't know, a near car accident or something like that. But you can just see on this page right here, we've got about 20 different words for fear. And so if we start to interrogate how fear plays a role in our life, we have to actually take stock of how often we experience any of these things, or we use any of these words, or we think in any of these terms. Because they're all different words for this element of our physiology we call fear. So how do you manage fear? Well, let me just ask you to drop into the chat. When you feel like you're in a fearful situation, or you are apprehensive or nervous or anxious about something, what's one thing you do to help you manage that fear? Please drop that into the chat. Do you have a practice? Do you have an action that you take to help you manage that experience for yourself? And if so, what is that? Okay, here's a few. Deep breathing, 5 deep breaths. I try to remind myself it's excitement, not fear. That's a very interesting perspective. Yep. Engage in restorative sleep or swim. Take a long walk. Yes. Move around, get up, walk. Deep breath. Convince myself it's not that big of a deal. Sure, that's about interpretation. First, I hide. Good. I like that, Wendy. When I recognize I'm hiding, and write grateful notes to others. Great. Play pickleball, excellent. Stepping back and meditating, great. These are all good approaches to managing an experience of fear. And if the experience of fear is relatively mild, then all kinds of things like this can be just what we need to help us kind of recenter ourselves and be able to move forward. In emotional intelligence, which is something we won't really be getting into in this conversation, but this is a piece of it, one of the goals is to shorten the amount of time that we are in that kind of hijack moment where we're kind of freaked out and maybe we're a little frantic and we're not able to be our best self. You know how when you get a little nervous, sometimes you might find it a little harder to do something like negotiate, effectively, or give a good speech, or even take a math test. Right? When your mind is on something else and you're kind of freaked out a little bit by whatever that is, it's hard to function as you might normally function otherwise. And so habits like this or practices like this can be really helpful when that level of emotional hijack or emotional experience is relatively low. When it's severe, maybe there's less that we can do about it. But certainly as professionals, we have to make sure that fear is not guiding our actions or our choices, at least not too much of the time. So here's some things we can do. We can evaluate the risks and ask ourselves, are they really as serious as they first appear to be? Sometimes they're not. We can face our fears. We can say, you know what, rather than hiding and run away from this, I'm actually going to lean into it. And of course, this is what a lot of the research shows, that if we lean into the emotional experience rather than lean away, we have an ability to experience it and process it that's easier than when you lean away. One of the interesting things about fear is that when you don't do anything about it, it tends to hang around. And for many of us, it can hang around for years and years and years. We never, ever process that particular thing that challenged us in the first place. Sure, create an action plan, trust yourself, breathe, talk about it. These are all things that we can do about it. We'll talk a little bit more, but I'd like to have everyone think a little bit more between this week and next week about how else you manage fear when you experience it, even if it's to a slight degree. Very often, we don't even recognize that we're in an experience of fear because maybe we're there a lot of the time. Having coached so many people over the last 20 years, I can tell you without hesitation, some people are living their lives from fear at almost every minute. Every minute, there's a degree of fear there because there's an interpretation of circumstance that's essentially what we call fear-based. A fear-based interpretation of circumstance essentially means you're focusing on the risks and the difficulties and the missing things out there. So did you ever, for example, go into a test when you were studying and think about how many questions you're likely to get wrong because you don't think that you studied well enough, or you don't understand the topic well enough? Rather than, I got this, I can handle this, I pretty much got it. Yeah, I may miss one or two, but I'll do pretty well overall. The first is a fear-based interpretation. Second one is, I got this, I'm going to nail it. And sometimes we're in that first circumstance. Sometimes we're in the second. The question is, how often are we in that kind of fear-based interpretation versus that second one? And there's no right or wrong here. And obviously, different situations provoke different kinds of interpretations for us and responses. But it is important when we're interrogating our relationship with fear, what we're asking is, what is my relationship with fear? What element of life or relationship is fear creating or contributing to my experience of life on a daily basis? And for some people, everything is seen through the lens of this will never work because I can't do this because it's no good because here's a danger because, right? And if that's how we live our life, of course, A, it's not going to make us successful as a business person. And B, it's a very uncomfortable place to be, for sure. Here's some other things we could do. Spend time with someone special. Visit nature. Nature has been proven in many, many cases to lower people's blood pressure, slow down their heartbeat, all kinds of stuff. So if you like nature, obviously that's a place you can go. Even sitting in a park for 15 minutes has shown to lower people's blood pressure and other things compared to other things like drugs and other stuff. Find a creative outlet, give to others, volunteer. All these things could be effective for you. I'm not saying you should try any of them or shouldn't, but they're things that others have found are useful for them. So you could take a look at any of these and you could spend the next week or two saying, I wonder if something like that might help me next time I'm feeling a little bit apprehensive about something. If I'm not at my best, if I'm not able to really make the choices that I need to make for the right reasons after the right kind of deliberation in my mind, maybe one of these things can help recenter me, get back to there so that I can operate from there rather than someplace else. So here's the principle itself. And what I want to say to everybody is, for you to be as masterful in your business and your life as possible, you need to master fear. You need to master your relationship with fear. And that's not easy. And probably there's no one who's ever mastered it in the history of humanity. However, being able to manage it effectively and recognize, when you're in some level of emotional hijack or emotional experience, and being able to manage that effectively is one of the most important skills. And if you can do that, then you're able to recenter yourself and be where you need to be, your best self, at a given moment in time. And so, in other words, you have to manage fear in order to be as successful as you can be as a professional, as a person. And so that's why the principle is everything you want is on the other side of fear. If we're continually on the same side of fear, that we're not dealing with it, we're not recognizing it, we're not managing it, we're not experiencing it, we're not doing any of those things, then the greatest success that we can have as a professional and as an individual will always be elusive. We can see this in the professional field. We can see this with finding a partner in life and finding love, those kinds of things, right? Great fear comes up around asking someone out about a date or wondering whether the person really likes you or really loves you or something like that, right? When you're on one side of that, you're always going to be uncomfortable. And unfortunately, you're going to not experience life the way that you could. But if you can find a way to manage through that experience of fear, which we'll talk a little bit more about next time, you get what you're able to get. So what do we do about that? Here's a couple of simple steps. One, make the decision to say to yourself, one of the things I need to do in becoming successful as a real estate agent is to master my own relationship with fear, or at least strengthen it, shift it, grow it, develop it. We've talked the last couple of weeks about education and learning and growth. This is a great area to work on. And there's millions of books out there. There's millions of podcasts. There's millions of TED Talks, all kinds of things you can do around fear. And if you simply made a decision to spend 30 minutes a week over the next 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks, 52 weeks, thinking about fear, working on fear, learning what other people have to say about it, learning what you can do with it, how you can leverage it, you can make a tremendous shift in how you experience life and how you create the life you want to create. Secondly, you can spend a little time thinking about identifying what aspect of your particular life tends to get most challenged. Is it about being rejected or fear of being rejected, losing your membership as a particular group? Is it more about your validity and worth as a human being, and you get challenged when someone challenges your judgment or your decision because they're essentially challenging you as a human being and finding you unworthy? Is it about when money is involved and that's where the real challenge and freak out is for you? Or is it something else? Give some thought to what is kind of the danger zone for you, where the fear is most likely to come up. And then spend some time reflecting on that. Spend 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it takes. Go out for a walk, meditate, whatever you want to do. Maybe watch a video, whatever. Spend a little time thinking about what is that experience like for you? What is your voice telling you in your head about this? Is it your voice telling you, I'll never be good at anything, I'll never be successful, my father told me I would always be a failure? Whatever that talk is in your mind, you need to be aware of it, because mastering fear involves understanding or having an awareness of whatever that experience is for you, including whatever some of that self-talk is. So those are a couple of things that you can do between this week and next. Let me pull this stuff down and hear your thoughts about any of this. So let me ask you, when I mention these things regarding fear, what comes up for you personally about this? I'm really curious to hear what is bubbling in your mind as I talk through these different concepts. Is it a specific situation that's coming up in your mind, or it's a pattern or a theme in your life or your business? What's coming up for you? Let's hear from a couple folks, please. See, here's the membership piece talking right now. How many of you hesitate to mention something right now because it's on your mind, but you're not sure how everyone else on the call might receive it? Therefore, you don't want to share it. That would be the membership thing coming up. I'm a member of this group on these calls every Wednesday, and I'm a full-fledged valued member. But if I say something wrong or say something stupid, someone's going to think I'm not so smart or whatever, so I better keep my mouth shut, right? That's membership talking. So let's start with you. Thanks for raising your hand. Can you come off mute, please?
Yes, my mental sharpness with age, everything deteriorates. My stamina, my memory retention, and I have a milestone birthday coming up on Monday.
Would you like to tell us what that birthday is, or should we just say happy birthday?
You should say happy birthday, because you should never ask a woman her age.
Okay, great. Well, happy birthday. Congratulations on the milestone birthday. And thank you for sharing that. For some of us, we're in a situation where my age is the risk factor. Maybe I'm too young and I don't know enough yet, or maybe I'm getting too old and I don't know how much longer I can do this at this high level or something like that. Lots of common ideas around age. Thank you, Mai. Who else? What's coming up for you? Kelly, please.
And this has just been a thing all my life, but, I think the desire to always need or want to be perfect, so that idea of being a perfectionist, has always been kind of a block. So what that results in is, stagnation and just not, moving forward quickly enough or efficiently enough, because that idea of perfectionism is holding me back. And so I've learned to try to overcome it and play mind games and what have you, and just, throw myself out there and try to put that wall down. But that's what comes to mind.
Yep, got it. Thank you. That perfectionism thing comes up a lot. It comes up more than you might expect. I've worked with so many people who've mentioned perfectionism. And my question always is, where's that coming from? Right? I mean, is there anyone on the planet, anyone on this call who expects anyone else on the planet to be perfect? Please raise your hand if you expect your husband or your wife or your good friend or your colleague or anyone else to be perfect. And yet we feel some kind of pressure to be perfect ourselves. So where is that coming from? Is that my premise to you is that's coming out of fear. When we feel the need to be perfect, we need to kind of go a layer or two below that and say, where's that coming from? If I'm not perfect, what happens? So Kelly, if you don't mind me just asking you a little bit further here, if you're not perfect, what's the danger there? Where does the risk come in for you?
Again, that's probably in my head more than based in reality.
Yeah.
Or external reality. So I think that's more than anything is my fear. If I'm not perfect, I fear that my client will, think of me less than if I'm not perfect, or, if I hadn't achieved up here.
Yep, got it. And so there's an easy like logic tree in our mind. If I'm not perfect for my client will be disappointed with my service. Therefore, that client will tell other people, therefore, my business is going to fall apart. Therefore, I'll be living under a bridge in 6 months. Right? It's like this unconscious cascade of thoughts, which can bring us to all kinds of conclusions, which may or may not be reasonable, and very often they're not. And yet there's some kind of a fear that's sourcing that particular drive to be perfect. It might be different from someone who's like an athlete, like let's say a gymnast, who could theoretically shoot for a perfect score in the floor routine or the balance beam, or a student who could aim for a perfect 100 score on a test. We might be driven to achieve that perfection because there is a measure of perfection. On the other hand, there's no measure of perfection maybe in our business. Yes, you want to conclude deals. Yes, you want to do deals well, but can't really score a deal like you might score a math test, for example. And so there's always the question, where does that come from? Thank you for sharing that, Kelly. Martha, you said you often feel anxiety and you've learned how to manage it. I'm just curious to you, where does the anxiety for you come from? Normally, well, I won't say any more. I'll just let you speak. Where does that anxiety come up for you?
I don't know where it comes from or when it comes up. I do think it's something that's been progressive as I've gotten older. I don't remember being anxious as a child, or as a teenager. It's just as I've gotten older. But one of the things I've tried to do the last several years is push myself outside my comfort zone, because I get anxious about anything. I get anxious about everything. I mean, I get anxious about public speaking. I get anxious about going on listing appointments. I get anxious about going to events that I want to go to. But I find that once I do those things, I actually have a good time, or I feel good about it, or, it's okay. And one of the things Mel Robbins says is that when you're feeling that anxiety, it's not really anxiety, it's excitement. If you can turn that same energy into excitement. So I try and focus on that more and just think, no, I'm not afraid of going to the event. I'm actually excited about it. And I can always leave if I don't like it. Let's just go and see what happens. So I have found that my growth, especially the past couple of years, has been tremendous based on the risks that I've been willing to take by stepping out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. This idea of fear and comfort zone, they can't be divorced. They're together, right? Fear and discomfort, in a sense, are two sides of the same coin, or they are different words for the same thing. Mel Robbins does have some interesting perspectives. If you're not familiar with Mel Robbins and you're looking for a new podcast, she's an interesting one. She's kind of an ordinary lady. She's not like this super guru like Tony Robbins or something. She has an interesting way of talking about how she kind of manages things in her life and talks with a lot of interesting people. So it's Mel Robbins is one opportunity. What was I going to say after that? Forget what my next comment was.
Well, since while you're thinking, I'll just say that the nice thing about Mel Robbins that I identify with is that she's not perfect.
Yes.
She's very faulted and embraces that. And by her embracing it, it kind of pulls you in and makes you realize that you're not any different than anybody else is.
Thank you. That's one thing I like about her too. There's a humility there. She's not trying to be perfect. She would like to be good at what she does and she would like to have a happy life, but she admits her faults and she admits her struggles. She tells stories about how she didn't do this well or didn't do that well. What I was going to say was, in the military, they have to train these guys to be able to handle extremely scary situations. They have to deal with fear to an incredibly high degree in the military. And, in a very basic sense, so much of the basic training is simply exposure to like getting people out of their comfort zone. So if they're going to teach somebody to be like a paratrooper jumping out of planes with parachutes, the first thing they do is they have them jump off a box 2 feet. And then they have to jump off a box, 8 feet. And then they climb up a tower and they've got them on this kind of string kind of thing that lets them down easily. And they jump 20 feet off of a tower. And, it kind of builds up step by step by step. And all of the military training is around that. It's starting with rather low level of achievement and then raising the bar again and again and again and again. And what happens along the way is not only do you gain the skills, but you gain a confidence in your ability to manage new situations because you face so many. And I got a sense of that in hearing from Martha, that she exposes herself to something and then she realizes maybe it wasn't as scary as she might have thought it was or whatever. But over time, she's built up a skill or a capacity to challenge her own ability to get out of her own, to be stuck in her own, well, call it comfort zone, call it, space of comfort and predictability.
It's being caught in my own head, David, is what it really is.
Absolutely. Well, here's the thing about fear, folks. And that's why the original slide said real or imagined. The biggest factor in the whole fear thing is what goes on in our head. I can almost guarantee you that I could show you a photo of an average person and you'd say, "Nah, looks like an average person." And I would say, "This person's terrified of mosquitoes." I'll show you a picture of another ordinary person. I'll say, "This person's terrified of ladybugs." I'll show you another ordinary picture of somebody else. I'll say, "This person's scared, totally terrified to walk into the store and buy a pack of gum." And somebody else, "This person is terrified to talk to somebody they don't know." Lots of people are terrified by one thing or another. And maybe all of us are terrified by one thing or another. But when you look at it from an outside point of view and you're not in your own head, you can realize that so much of that fear is just in your own head. And so when we ask ourselves, what's my relationship with fear, and ask yourself, what's my little voice telling me? It's an extremely important practice here, is to recognize what is that conversation in your own mind that puts you in the position to say, "I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. I don't want to go to this event. I don't want to take on this challenging, house to sell. I don't want to take on challenges, this great person to work with who's also very challenging to work with." All these choices, of course, are influenced by fear. Okay, everyone, we're at time for today. Thanks for your input today. Please give some thought between this week and next about your own relationship with fear. Where does the fear come up for you? When does it come up for you? What's the perceived risk for you? Is it to your bank account? Is it to your validity as a human being? Is it as your professional reputation or something else? And come back next week and we'll talk about that a little bit. Thanks for those who shared today and looking forward again to seeing you again next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, David. These are really great. Thank you so
Great.
much.
You're welcome.